I am a 38-year-old male, and this happened to me 2 years ago. It was my first month on the job, and I worked night security at this pretty interesting place. I've worked security jobs most of my life and the graveyard shift. I was an event security guard for various well-known concert venues for years, so I've seen my fair share of strange things and crazy people. In other words, I don't scare easily and hardly ever go into a panic mode when a crisis comes up. The place I currently work is a resort-style apartment complex. To get the layout, there are 3 floors of apartments with 50 units on each floor. This place takes up 1 city block with a golf course in back, indoor swimming pools, hot tubs, and a small movie theater. You name it, this place has it. Most of the residents are retired doctors, lawyers, and otherwise rich. There are some younger people that live here as well, stockbrokers and real estate agents and so on. Some just use their apartment in the summer and leave as soon as the snow falls. It is located in a well-known tourist town in the United States. The building itself has 12 exits on the first floor. The doors are locked at 11 p.m. You can exit, but you can't get back in unless you go to the front of the building and ask to be buzzed in or pick up the call box phone next to whatever exit you are at. It will ring the company's cell phone, and I answer and can come and let you in. The front lobby is set up much like a hotel, with sliding glass doors which I lock when I start my shift. In the middle of the building on first floor are 2 big slider doors which I also lock. They lead to the private parking lot. The parking lot itself is gated and you need a code to get in. This was midsummer, and while it's never really hot here, this one particular night was an exception. It was still very warm after the sun had set. I came in 10 minutes to 11 to start my shift. We have a routine to hand off the keys, event log, and phone to the next person on duty. Despite its size, I am the only security person here at night. My co-worker who was leaving told me the side iron gates that led to the parking lot were open on one side because they were stuck. This was nothing new, and they often did get jammed. She told me the repair people would be in tomorrow sometime to fix them, but to just do some extra patrol out there tonight. This place sits across the road from a public park, and while the area is pretty decent, the park tends to breed druggies and homeless at night who sometimes like to try and wander on the property or cause trouble. My night started out as uneventful. As a security guard in this place, we only have pepper spray, a large flashlight, keys, and a company cell phone to call 911 if need be. We are told not to confront with bodily harm, nor can we detain anyone. We are simply eyes and ears and to call the police if something comes up. Of course, you can defend yourself if you need to, but in all cases, if you are in danger, call the police is the company policy. Basically, I am to walk the grounds and floors for anyone suspicious, watch the cameras in the security office which is in the lobby, and otherwise try to stay alert. If a resident calls for a maintenance request, I would take the information down in the computer for day shift, or if a resident called with a security issue, I would attend to it. Pretty easy enough job, I thought. I locked the doors to the parking lot and the lobby doors. I did a sweep of all the floors and then found myself back at the desk. It was really quiet and it rolled around to 3 a.m. I had just sat down to eat my lunch when the company cell phone rang. The caller ID let me know it was from one of our outside call box phones. I picked it up and said my usual line. All I heard was someone breathing heavy. I glanced at the cameras and could see the shadow of a figure standing just out of reach from the door and camera view. All I could see is the open call box and the metal cord from the phone. I asked how I could help this person. The man started to breathe heavier and then began to laugh. Then there was silence. It was one of those laughs you hear in a movie when the lunatic is about to do something terrible. I got up from my chair and started to walk out of the office and to the door he was at when it rang again. This time from call box number 2, which was further down. I quickly looked at the camera and seen this large figure in a hooded jacket. I knew this was strange as it was very warm outside. He was holding a black bag in his hands but had his back to the camera. He then said in a raspy, deep tone that he was coming for me and that I was going to die. He hung up before I had the chance to say anything. Then the phone rang again. This time I picked up, and before he could speak, I let him know the cops were on their way and that he had to leave the property now as he was on camera. He tried the doors and both were locked. This time he was at yet another call box. This guy had to be running at top speed to make it to the next and the next call box, as they are a good distance between doors on the outside. He then told me that he could see me and asked if I was ready to die and that the cops won't make it there in time to save me. I spoke real loud and pretended like I was talking to another security officer and asked him to send 3 other security guards to such and such location and that police were dispatched. The guy slammed the phone down loud against the call box receiver, and I watched him on camera take off into the darkness to the park area. I figured it scared him off. I was going to call the police, but honestly the location of this place, it would take them at least 15 minutes to get here, and I figured this guy was just some tweaker from the park. I scanned the cameras and walked the back lot just to be sure no one was there. I had my pepper spray in my hands just in case, but no one was out there. I returned to my desk and wrote what happened in the incident log. About a half hour passed, and I had finished lunch and was just about to do rounds when the phone rang again. This time, it was from an unknown number. I thought it would be a resident calling for a repair issue or something. I picked up and said my normal line. I then heard a voice say, "Where are the cops? I don't see them, but I see you." I quickly realized it was that same guy again. I scanned the cameras and did not see anything. I went to the front door to look out, and there was nothing but darkness and a few front floodlights on. He then told me that he knew I was alone and that I was going to die soon. I basically told him to get lost and hung up. I called the non-emergency number to 911 and let them know what was going on. The dispatcher said she would send out a car to check the area and make contact with me. Next, I heard a loud thud against the glass windows to the day manager's office, which sits across from the security room. Then I heard another 3 loud bangs. I ran to the door and unlocked it. I pulled up the shades and shined my flashlight through the window into the darkness. I caught the face of this hooded man. He looked to be about 40, with long stringy hair poking down and these wild eyes. He looked right at me and grinned before slamming his head into the window to try and break it. I started yelling at him and told him the cops were coming and to get the hell out of there. That's when he pulled the biggest butcher knife I've ever seen and made a slicing motion like he would use it to cut my throat. This guy was crazy and probably on drugs. He continued slamming his body against the glass trying to break it. He used his head to try and break the window but managed to bust his head open, so the window now had blood all over it. I backed out of the office and locked the door to it. I then decided to wait for the cops as this guy was out of control and my pepper spray wasn't going to stop him, and the last thing I wanted was to handle a bloody crazy person. He then ran to the nearest side door and took the call box phone off the hook. He then ran to each call box and removed all the phones, which caused my company's cell phone to ring and jam up the line. This guy had to be on meth or something because he ran as fast as I could imagine. I watched the camera and noticed to my horror the sliding door to the garage was open. Now, it was common for residents to go out to their cars and unlock the doors themselves. It's just a sliding lock like the kind in department stores, but this is the last thing I needed with this nut job running around. I quickly sprinted across the building and took a shortcut through a couple banquet rooms to make it to the garage. As I was doing so, I saw that crazy guy running up the garage pathway. I slid that door as fast as I could and locked it before he got to the entryway. He then slammed his body into the glass over and over, but the door did not move. I locked the second set of doors in case he got through the outside ones. He would at least be trapped or it would slow him down. I reached for my pepper spray, thinking maybe he would just leave, and yelled that the cops were here. He started to laugh and howl and then held that knife up again before running into the darkness of the parking garages. I called the cops on my personal cell phone to let them know that the man had a knife. The dispatcher told me the cops will be there shortly, and I let her know what happened. I made my way to the front again and locked myself in the security office. At least this place had no windows and I could watch on camera. I heard another loud thud and bang and realized he was at the front lobby doors trying to get in. I was hoping the cops would roll up any minute, but they didn't, and while it probably didn't take them long, it felt like forever at this point. The guy was standing at the lobby doors with a knife in hand. He faced the camera, and by this time his hood had fallen back. He was bald-headed with wild, long, stringy, crazy hair on the sides of his head. His eyes were huge, and I will never forget that grin on his face as he mouthed to the camera the word die, while making stabbing motions with that knife. Blood was still running across his face from slamming into the glass, but then he ran out into the darkness. About 5 minutes later, the cops showed up. They sent one officer. He asked me what the guy looked like, and I told him I had camera footage. He drove through the area first and shined a spotlight. The cop returned to tell me he couldn't find anyone, and he had driven around the entire block and back area behind the golf course. I showed him the footage and printed out a picture from the camera. The cop said he didn't see any sign of the guy and that he would patrol the area and to call back if he came again. At this time, it was now nearly 5 a.m. when the cop left. I waited until 6 a.m. when it was daylight and people were starting to get out and about before I walked around and hung up all the phones from the call boxes. This guy literally took all 12 phones off the hook. When my manager came in during the morning shift at 8 a.m., I told her what happened, and she said that they would keep an eye out and have a meeting to let everyone who worked here know and to be aware. They had an extra security guard on my shift for 2 weeks after, but the guy never returned, and the cops never found the guy or who he was. Just a little bit of background information. I'm a female, and I work in retail, and on top of that, I have a very unique name. This happened a few years ago when I first started. I work at a 24-hour convenience store, and at this point I was working the graveyard shift. I'm used to all types of unsavory folks, but there was this one guy who left me particularly unsettled. It was about 3 a.m., and unfortunately I was working alone because my coworker decided to call out last minute. The store was dead at this point, and I was packing out a delivery when he walked in. He was a short, stocky guy, a little older than me, probably late 20s or early 30s. I looked up from the task at hand and greeted him with a friendly smile and asked him if he needed help with anything. He grinned and looked me up and down. His brown eyes were darkening with lust, and then he asked if we sold condoms. I nodded and pointed him to the health and beauty section and proceeded to make my way to the register to cash him out. He browsed for a little while and then picked up a box of Magnums and some herbal sexual supplement pills. He then inquired how my night was going. I told him I was fine, working hard and anxious to go home. His eyes traveled up and down my body, and then they settled on my name tag, which is pinned just beneath my left breast. I felt a little uncomfortable. I've never been comfortable with people staring at me, and his eyes lingered longer than necessary. He then asked how to pronounce my name, which I did tell him. He then responded and said it was a beautiful name. Politely, I told him thank you and began to scan and bag his items, trying to avoid eye contact. He then asked if I had a boyfriend, and I told him yes, which was an honest answer. He then commented and said that my boyfriend must be a lucky man and he wishes he could be in his shoes. Again, I smile uncomfortably and, as we're supposed to do, ask if he needs anything else. He then responded, "Not unless I can have you." At this point, I began getting annoyed. I ignored his comment and proceeded to tell him his total. He then swiped his card. I completed the transaction and told him to have a good night. He thanked me and then asked if I was working by myself. I lied and told him no, that my coworker was downstairs doing some paperwork. He then gave a creepy grin and said that my coworker wasn't downstairs because he has been watching me since 12 and he hadn't seen another person in the store all this time. He then asked if I was afraid. I frowned and told him that he needed to leave if he was done shopping. I told him I had work to complete. Once again, he laughed at me. I thought he was going to argue, but a group of drunken guys walked in and he left. Later that night, I checked my Facebook and saw I had a friend request. As mentioned earlier, I have a really unique name, and only 2 people have that same name on Facebook. I blocked him and deleted the friend request. The next morning, as I was going to the subway station, the wanted poster on the token booth catched my eye. The face looked really familiar. It was the creep from the store, wanted for sexual assault and battery on East 96th Street. The incident happened more than a month ago. I quickly told my manager, who called the police and gave him our tip. I still don't feel comfortable with name tags, and I don't know if the guy was ever caught. I used to work at an inn that was in a sleepy beach town in Southern California, but it had plans to be part of someone's chain hotel. The property was very small, but in a seriously idealistic location, so it was close enough to the water to be expensive, but not big enough to have more than one front desk employee working at a time. My sister and I worked there together, and we had one manager. Aside from the housekeeping, which they got to leave a lot sooner than the unfortunate front desk who worked nights, I used to work mornings, which is a lot more hectic considering checkouts at this particular property were tough. Plus, we didn't have a lot of things like dishwashers, so you had to wash everything by hand. My sister worked the nights, and I took the mornings, but I didn't mind the extra work, only because I didn't feel safe in the hotel at night. The area didn't have a lot of crime. It was just something about the way the front desk area looked. We had the front desk, and in front of it would be the breakfast area. It had tons of windows. It was more window than wall, and you could easily see out into the ocean and into the garden, as well as the stairs that came up into the lobby. In the daytime, it was really charming. But at night, it felt always unsettling to me, especially since, if you worked the night shift, you had to stay till 11 p.m. at night without even closing the front door. Now again, this wouldn't be a big deal, but we had no security, no cameras, not even the housekeeping. It was just you by yourself, with this black void to look out to while you counted down your hours until you could go home. One night, I had been stuck with a night shift, covering for my sister. I didn't have my uniform or anything because it was kind of unexpected. For whatever reason, I decided to close the lobby door, and I'm glad that I had. The door wasn't locked, so any late-night customers could come in, but none did that night. It had finally hit 11 p.m., and I was super relieved to get off. When I had finished my end-of-shift duties, I had grabbed my keys and turned around to turn off the lights before leaving, when the phone suddenly rang. My gut tensed for a second, only because it was so loud and I was surprised. We were supposed to forward the calls to our manager's phone, in case someone got locked out of their room and we had to come down and help them. I pretty quickly calmed myself down because I was more annoyed than anything, and stepped around the desk to answer the phone. I gave my usual line as best as I could for being annoyed. At first there was nothing. No one said anything. I said hello again and asked if anyone was there. I thought it was a dead call or a butt dial, but I could hear the ocean on the other side as it was a particularly windy night, so the waves were louder than usual. Then I just hung up. When I went to leave again, the phone rang a second time. I picked up, gave my same line, and I finally got a response. A man's voice asked if there was any rooms available. He didn't sound drunk. If anything, he sounded collected. The place was next to a bar, so if it was just some drunk dude, I would have known. He sounded calm, like unnervingly calm. I had apologized to him and told him that we were closing for the night. It's not uncommon for someone to find our hotel on like some Priceline type thing and try to get us to give them a lower price over the phone. What he continued to say, however, really scared me, and I don't scare very easily. He asked, "Oh, so none are available?" I explained to him no, that we were closing. He then responded, "What about the one you're standing in front of?" I immediately froze. See, how the lobby is set up is that there's a door also behind the counter, and that door leads to another room that is directly behind the lobby. We're not allowed to close that one either, but I had left it open in case anyone needed help. All of the rooms are outside, and all of the halls that lead to other rooms and staircases are outside as well, so anyone can just walk up and walk around the hotel without being a guest or an employee. So quite literally, anyone can just come off the street and be anywhere in the hotel. It's one of the reasons why I left. I turned and closed the door behind me, locking it, and the front door was already closed as well. I had explained to the man that we were all booked up, and if there was anything he needed, he would have to call back in the morning. I was noticeably more scared now. I think my voice even cracked. I was going to hang up before he had something else to say. And then in the creepiest, most slithering voice I have ever heard, he said that he liked my tiger. As I said before, I wasn't wearing my uniform that day. I had a gray shirt that had this rainbow paint splatter type tiger face on the front. I stared out into the windows before it really hit me. The lights inside the lobby lit it up so you could see inside of it, while from being inside you just saw nothing but blackness. He was outside of the lobby, probably most likely staring in through the glass. I didn't get to say anything before he asked, "Is the front door locked?" I threw the phone out of my hand and ran around the desk, locking the deadbolt on the front door. I began to, what I assume was, have a panic attack. I was crying and freaking out. I had never been so scared at one time in a really long time. Then banging came from the door. I was too afraid to grab the phone that I had thrown because it was flung across the windows and I didn't know if he was going to break one of them or not. So I grabbed my cell phone and locked myself into the bathroom that was right next to our desk. I called my aunt, who lived less than a mile away. I know I should have called the police, but I was really young at the time and I was out of my mind, and she was a black belt, so I knew she could defend herself. I called her and barely was able to tell her what was happening between my crying and freaked out breathing. Normally, this wouldn't have scared me so bad, but I've dealt with stalker-like stuff before, and it felt the exact same way as it did in the past. Nightmarish. It wasn't until she called me again and told me she was outside the lobby, and that it was locked that I had left the bathroom. I knew I made a mistake by not calling the police, because he wasn't there anymore by the time she had gotten to the door. So I have no idea what he looks like, and our policy of never keeping the door closed didn't change, even after I had reported to the owners what happened. I've had some issues with safety after that, but none as scary as this one. If it was some drunk, it would have been fine, but this guy sounded like he fully knew what he wanted to do, whatever it was. That is the last time I will ever work a night shift.